Hey guys, we're looking at exploring world history, lesson 39, and we're going to be talking about ancient Africa, ancient America, and ancient Europe, okay? And when we're studying ancient civilizations, it's very important to remember that separating fact from fiction when discussing ancient civilizations is difficult, especially when those cultures do not leave written records. Anthropologists and other scientists often have strong presuppositions that cause them to interpret evidence in certain ways or to announce what they believe to be the truth with little or no evidence at all. Academic speculation gets picked up as scientific conclusions and then repeated as assured facts. Experts sometimes have a hard time admitting that they do not know the answers. The information about ancient cultures in this lesson specifically is based on current proposed theories. Future discoveries might change what is commonly believed today, okay? So the first place we want to talk about is Africa, okay? Africa is a continent, it's just a huge continent. It's 3 times the size of the continental United States, okay? It's just 3 times as big as the continental United States. Has a varied geography. There's rainforests and deserts and mountains. There's grasslands and savannas. There's temperate zones. Many rivers all throughout Africa. Okay, the people of Africa have multiple different tribal groups, and there's hundreds of different languages spoken throughout all of Africa. Okay, the different cultures that we kind of see in especially ancient Africa. Egypt is the main one, right? The Egyptian culture is something most people know and most people talk about. Sometimes they fail to realize it's in Africa, but it shouldn't, but it is. So next is we also have the Kingdom of Kush. Okay, this was just south of Egypt. There was about 750 BC. They actually conquered Egypt, but then later retreated. Eventually, the Kingdom of Kush declines in around 200 BC. They are mentioned in the Bible with a different spelling, though, with a C instead of a K, and that's in 2 Kings and in Isaiah. Another culture of ancient Africa is the Axum, and this was south of Kush. So we had Egypt, and then Kush, and then Axum. Axum was greatly influenced by trade with the Arab world, and so their part had a mix of Arab and African cultures in it. The king of Axum converted to Christianity in around 300 AD. Also, you have Ethiopia, okay? Ethiopia is an area kind of around Kush and Axum. Those areas, it's mentioned in Acts in chapter 8, verses 26 to 40, where the Ethiopian eunuch is confronted and connected and converted to Christianity, and it's believed that he actually takes Christianity back to Ethiopia. And most of those were on that part of Egypt where it's all basically Egypt and below Egypt. But then in West Africa we have Ghana. Ghana was one of the first well-known areas in West Africa. It has an abundance of salt and gold and became the first major trading state or nation in West Africa. When we're dealing with the tribes, the nations and tribal groups of Africa, most were formed during the period between Christ's birth and the Middle Ages, okay? Northern Africa is strongly influenced by the Muslim conquests in the 7th and 8th centuries AD. And, lots of different tribes in Africa, and generally speaking, the tribes lived in villages, okay? Smaller villages. Not big cities like we saw in other places. They had extended family arrangements. The men were the accepted leaders, and the women had different roles, but were still considered very significant, okay? So much so that in some places of Africa, in some tribes of Africa, they had a matrilineal situation. Usually you hear paternal, but it's matrilineal. It basically means that they trace their family line and then their inherited property through the mother, not the father. Okay, and like I said, several different African tribes did this. Multiple different religions in Africa, but most of them believed there was one great spirit and several of them had animism as a type of religion where trees and rocks and other elements of nature had spirits and they believed and worshiped those spirits. Just a general overview of some civilizations in Africa, ancient civilizations in Africa. Next, we're going to kind of do the same thing with the Americas, okay? The traditional understanding of how people first came to the Americas is that they walked from Siberia to Alaska over a land bridge that was later submerged after the ice from an ice age melted. However, again, this is only a guess. A few scholars speculate that the first Americans crossed the ocean by boat. The frank answer is we just don't know. Remember, as we talked about at the very beginning, with ancient civilizations, there's a lot of guesswork and a lot of things that we just don't know. Same is true with the groups here in the Americas. When we're talking about the Americas, we're talking about two continents, both North America and South America. And, some people call it Middle America, the area, the isthmus that connects both North and South America. And so you get a wide diversity of geography and weather, okay? You have rivers and mountains and plains and deserts. You have coastal areas. You have rainforests. So a huge, diverse geography. And the weather, because of that geography, can fluctuate as well. You can have extreme heat temperatures. You can have extreme cold temperatures. You can have tornadoes and floods and hurricanes. So we just have to remember that this is a large area that we're just kind of barely touching the surface of. Just got to make sure we have a familiarity of what kind of was going on in these ancient groups. Some of the nations and tribal groups of the Americas, we start with the Inuits. These are mostly found in what is now Alaska and Canada. They hunted and fished. They lived in igloos and ice huts. They were basically extreme cold weather group of people. In other North American tribes or tribal groups, we had in the southwest of the U.S., there are a lot of farming and hunting that went on down there. They dried mud for their adobe dwellings. In the northeastern part of the U.S., you had Iroquois and other tribes, Native American tribes. They used wooden framed log houses covered with hides as their places, and they generally lived in small villages. As we work our way south, we wanted to talk about the Olmec civilizations. It started around 1200 BC. They flourished in southern Mexico. They built large pyramids and carved huge stone faces. They had a hieroglyphic writing system. They had an advanced counting system. They had an accurate calendar, an extremely intelligent civilization. They wound up disappearing somewhere around the 1st century AD, and we're not exactly sure why. The next civilization is the Maya civilization, the Mayan civilization. They started out and centered in Guatemala. They rose to power and prominence around 250 AD. They spread to a lot of that Middle America and southern Mexico and South America. They were a polytheistic group of people. They built very large cities with pyramids, playing fields, etc., temples. They created huge irrigation systems where they were able to farm and grow crops that they were able to trade. They also had a very precise calendar. They had a numbering system that included 0, and they started to decline somewhere around 900 AD. Next, we talk about the Aztecs, okay? They started to rise up in around 1200 AD in Mexico. Their capital was Tenochtitlan, which is in current present-day Mexico City, okay? They were a very warlike people. They conquered and ruled many tribes. They were such warlike people that even their religion included human sacrifices, and they worshipped a sun god. The last group of people we want to talk about in the Americas as an ancient civilization group are the Incas, okay? The Incas are in what is modern-day Peru. They were a mountainous region of the western South America, and they were around 1200 AD. They were polytheistic, but especially worship of a sun god. They built temples and many roads that kind of meandered and wandered through the extreme mountains there. They had advanced medical practices as well. Lastly, we're going to talk about some of the European tribes, okay? And just some general information, the nomadic tribes of Europe are thought to have come from the grassy steppes of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, okay? So they migrated from there is what we believe. And we believe that information because of the languages and other similarities suggests a common origin, that these people all came from a common area. They were kind of given the name barbarians by the Greeks. It was a word that the Greeks used to describe how those different people spoke and the language that they spoke. They said it sounded like barbar, or their word for gibberish. Basically, we can't understand you, and we gave you a name. However, that name eventually turned to be kind of derogatory in its use, and they were barbarians and barbaric people, and it kind of had this negative connotation to it. One of the things that usually comes to mind when you're talking about European ancient civilizations is Stonehenge, right? It's the large stones in a circle. It's mysterious stone circles and early evidence of humans in Europe. It's found in southern England, and we're not exactly sure who built it. There's some thoughts about who, but then other evidence shows that that's not the case. But let's go ahead and talk about a couple of the different tribes and nations that were in this ancient Europe, okay? The first is being the Celts, okay? They lived in Central and Western Europe. They migrated into Britain around 500 BC. They also settled in parts of France and Spain. They were very fierce and cruel warriors. They produced refined artwork and craftwork, and they had their Celtic religion, which was Druids. The Druids were their Celtic religion, okay? You also had a group of people called the Saxons. These Saxons were of a Germanic tribe. They moved across Northern Europe kind of after the weakening of the Roman Empire. So while the Roman Empire was there, they kind of were held at bay, but once the Roman Empire started to fall apart and crumble, they started to move across Northern Europe. At that point, they invaded Britain in the 5th century AD. They kind of pushed the Celts west and north into Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. And most of the time you think of the Celts or the Celtic people, you're thinking Ireland. And they kind of wound up being there and settling there because these Saxons came in and pushed them farther west. And when these Saxons did that, they wound up settling in what would be the mainland of England. Some of the other Germanic tribes that came through at this point were the Angles, which is where we get the word England. It started out as England, and now we call it England, and that happened around 890 AD. We had Jutes. Eventually, the Angles and the Saxons combined, and they would get the group of Anglo-Saxons, and that's around 800 AD. So, I know it was very quick, a lot of just, scratch the surface of information, but it's important to kind of recognize as we're studying world history and ancient civilizations, most people just want to talk about Egypt. And Egypt may have been the most prominent one, but they weren't the only one. And so, as we talked about, in the previous lesson, we talked about the Indus Valley civilizations. Now we just wanted to kind of briefly hit the African, the European, and the Americas, and just kind of highlight some of the early civilizations that were going there as well. Make sure you're reading the material. Thank you.